welcome. Thank you so much. I mean, I can see exactly where you are. You're in 1920s Glasgow, but
1920s Glasgow. Yep.
Would you like to say where you are?
Just adding a little bit of flavour to the event. So,
would you like to just tell people where you actually physically are and how long you've been there and why you're here, why you're there?
Okay, so I am in Glasgow, as it happens, by chance more than anything else. As Christopher mentioned before, I was in Spain for quite a few months over the winter, and I just got out of Spain before Spain locked down, and I'm glad to hear that things are getting back a little bit to normal there. And I was on my way to Canada and Mexico and Cuba. I should be in Cuba at the moment, but I got caught in Glasgow with all the lockdowns and everything. And it's actually a very good place for me to be because my mom's here and she's 88. And it's quite good that both my brother and I were here to sort of make sure she's okay. So yeah, so I'm in Glasgow, as you can see from the background.
Yes, absolutely.
I can time.
So it's been great just doing a little bit of a go round with all so many members of the audience are familiar with the books, as am I. So,
then.
So yeah, so we're going to focus on the Glasgow to Gallilee trilogy, at least for the most part of the talk. And so would you like to just give us an outline, a brief outline of the themes that are contained in the novels, and then we'll go through each one.
Okay, well, I didn't actually start out by writing a trilogy, and that's the first thing. And so that took me a little bit by surprise. I thought I was just, I'm just writing some stories, and then it's just turned into trilogy. And I suppose that it's only now when I look back on the three novels that I realized that I was writing about my life, really. And I think that, I mean, for me, it's like writing about my Jewish background, my Jewish upbringing. And I suppose it doesn't matter who we are or where we are or whatever. I mean, whatever our backgrounds are, our heritage, our parents, our where we were born, our culture, and so on. We're either going to accept that, or we're going to reject it, or we're going to embrace it, or we're going to try and get away from it all. And I suppose when I look back now, I mean, these books were sort of writing about my sort of relationship with my Jewish background. So the first novel, The Credit Draper, I guess that novel is really about community, and it's about identity. And I suppose for me, it was sort of trying to work through the whole sort of, you know, Scottish Jewish identities that we have, and that I have, and that any conflict with that, and so on. And then from there, I moved on to The Liberation of Celia Khan, this novel here, which tends to be the runt in my litter of novels. Celia Khan is really about it's about my involvement with, I suppose, with Habonim. For those of you who don't know what Habonim is, Habonim still is, I guess, a sort of Jewish Zionist socialist youth group. I suppose Zionist at a time when Zionism doesn't have the sort of pariah status that it has now. So I was in Habonim, and Habonim we sort of were brought up to. There's probably people here that were in Habonim. It was a sort of, when people were other kids were at the Scouts, I was at this organization learning about kibbutz in Israel and community living, and going off to build collective farms in the Middle East. So that was and my father also was quite a socialist, and he took us to May Day parades, and both my brother and I remember very well being taken to see Paul Robeson singing in Queen's Park in 1960. He was the first black person I'd seen in my life, and a phenomenal figure that has been forgotten a little bit. in the history of the civil rights movement in America, but we got to see him. Our father took us to see that. So I was kind of, so I was, I guess in Celia Khan, I was looking at the Jewish experience with socialism, especially in Glasgow, which was quite a very strong socialist background there, especially in the 1920s. And the same time, the Russian Revolution had been going on. And so there was an interesting relationship there that I wanted to explore through that novel. And then I suppose that quite naturally took me to Israel and Palestine in the 1920s, where I sort of wrote about my experience living on kibbutz. I lived on kibbutz for a period of 6 years between 78 and 88, back and forward a few times there. And it was a very happy period for me in my life living on kibbutz. But it also was a time of, you can't live in Israel and not every day is, every day is like conflict there. Something's always happening, at least then in the 70s, 80s and so on. It was quite a violent time. And so I suppose I wanted to write about that too in The Land Agent, just trying to look at my experience in Israel and Palestine as it was then in the 1920s, and about the issues there. So these were the sort of the three themes that ran through those three novels in general. So yeah.
Thank you.
Trilogy.
So I had a relative who was a credit draper. Tell me where the idea came from for the novel and a bit of the story of the novel itself.
Well, I think if you scratch the surface of any Jewish family in Glasgow, if not in Scotland, you're going to find the credit draper. I don't know if everybody knows what a credit draper is or was, but basically they were peddlers or traveling salesmen. I think mostly men. Although I think there were women, they were basically, they would go out and sell goods on behalf of the warehouses in Glasgow anyway. And it was an easy job to give any immigrant that was arriving in Scotland, any Jewish immigrant at that time. And basically, there were some warehouses in Glasgow at that time that were Jewish owned. And these warehouse owners would take on these immigrants who just basically turned up and said, well, here's some aprons, here's some work shirts, here's some linen, some drapery or whatever. Off you go and sell it. And if you can sell them at a profit before you can give me the money that you owe me, then you have a business. And I suppose that's how people started off, building up their families and supporting their families when they were arriving as immigrants here. And interesting enough, when I've talked around the country about credit drapers, most people actually remember credit drapers as being among the Pakistani families in Scotland, which was kind of a generation later, because the Pakistanis, they were also doing the same thing when they came to Scotland. So a lot of people remember that it's people from Pakistan that were the traveling salesmen rather than the Jews from a generation before. So I don't really have much of an interest in the credit drapers in Glasgow growing up. My grandfather was a credit draper, and I didn't really pay much attention to it. I mean, I just assumed that everybody that was a credit draper sort of worked in and around Glasgow and so on, and that was it, and it wasn't particularly interesting. But one day my stepfather, George, lovely man, told me about his uncle, Johnny, who was a credit draper in the Highlands. And I thought, really? Really? Did they go out into the Highlands? And he says, yeah. He said he used to go away during the week, for five days up into the Highlands and go around all the sort of little crofting communities. And he would be staying in some, I don't know, some farmer, some laird's cottage or something, and then he would come back for the Sabbath and so on. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. I wondered what it would be like for a Scottish for a Scottish person in the Highlands seeing this sort of Jewish peddler traipsing up the hillside with his wares to sell. And I just thought that there's a story in there. And of course, that story is about the whole Scottish Jewish sort of traditions and cultures coming together. But the problem that I had when I started to investigate it was that I expected there to be all this conflict between the two cultures, but I discovered that in fact they were quite similar, and they seemed to get on quite well. I mean, there was a lot of sort of shared culture in sort of the music and the violins, and in the whiskey and the schnapps, you know, and the brandies and all this kind of thing, and the herring and all this kind of thing as well. So I felt that there wasn't any, I didn't have any conflict. So I've had to basically create a whole lot of conflict in the Credit Draper that in reality probably didn't exist that much.
Damn, everyone was getting on really well. There's no novel in that.
Yeah, there's no point. There was no point. I just thought, well, I've got to think up something. So yeah, if you've read the Credit Draper, there's plenty of conflict in there. So yes, that's my answer to your question, Fiona.
Let's move on to the next question. Yeah, I'm going to say my bit of story about the Credit Draper. When I went to a talk about this, where I was told that all the different Jewish credit drapers went and stayed in the same places, or all the Jewish credit merchants that sold all different things went to the same lodgings all around. And I was told that they kept kosher pots for them, and they would write in Hebrew. I really don't know if this is true. They would write in Hebrew the latest the parsha of the week when they were there, and that Hebrew would still be there when the next Jewish credit draper, credit salesman came round and would use the kosher pot that nobody else would have used.
The other thing about credit drapers were that they had a code. They had a code because and the code was 10 letters. It was a word.
Yeah.
10 letters, and each letter had to be different. And so if you, a lot of the customers, especially in Glasgow, not so much obviously in the Highlands, but when they were working in Glasgow, a lot of the customers that they would go to sell on credit, because it was the only way in those days that you could get credit to buy things.
Yeah.
There was no hire purchase, and there was no obviously credit cards, and so they would give them a note to take to the warehouse, so that they could get the goods that they wanted on credit. And the credit draper would write a letter on the code, on the note, denoting the markup to give the customer. Right. So I think in my note, I mean, I haven't read the Credit Draper for about 10 years, so I'm not sure I can remember myself, but I think the code in the book is Cumberland, the word Cumberland, which is 10 letters, and they're all different, and each letter stands for 10%. So if you are a good customer or something, and they might only give you a markup of like 30%, so you write, so it'd be CUM, so you'd write the Credit Draper like an M on the note, and the warehouse would know to add 30% to the wholesale price. And obviously if it was a D, Cumberland, it would be 100% and so on. So that was how they worked.
Fabulous. So do you want to talk us through the story of the novel then?
Yeah, well, the story it's about a young boy called Abraham Escovitch, who was born in 1900. I sort of have all my characters born in 1900, all my main characters, so that I can remember their ages as I'm writing the book. So Abraham was born in 1900, and he was born in Russia, and at 12 years of age, he was going to be conscripted into the Russian army, because the Russian army had to take so many young males from every village to be conscripted into the army, and they were giving, the villages would hand over the Jews to take their place in the army, and they were running out of Jews, and their ages kept coming down from 18, 17, 16, 15. So they were starting to take 12-year-olds into the army. So Avram, his mother, tried to get him out of this by sending him off to Glasgow, where there was a link to a family there, the Khan family, that's never really disclosed in the novel. So Avram turns up in Glasgow at 12 years of age and is adopted into the Khan family. And he discovers that he has a talent for playing football, which fits very well into the sort of the culture of I was going to say of the time, now as well. And he had sort of ambitions that he was going to be this great footballer, and various things happen. The First World War breaks out, of course, and various things happen to the Khan family, and he has to put aside any ambitions he had of professional football, and he's packed off to the Highlands of Scotland to work as a credit draper with his uncle Mendel, and the story unfolds from there, basically. Okay. Yeah.
So, did you do lots of research? Did it all just come to you because of the family?
Well, I didn't. People get very disappointed when I tell them about my novels. Not doing a lot of research, especially because they're historical novels. You'd think I would have done a lot of research, but and that's more pertinent when I come to the land agent, to talking about land agent. But there was to be honest, I was probably writing this novel about 15 years ago, 2005, I think. And to be honest, there was very little written around about this time in sort of Glasgow or Scottish Jewish history. Scottish Jewish Archive Centre, which is thriving now, thanks to people, Harvey Kaplan and Deborah Haas and Fiona Brodie, is doing really well. It's now, but back in 15 years ago, there was very little. They had very little material, and they gave me very few things to work with, some letters and a little bit of memoir, and so on. Dr. Kenneth Collins wrote a very detailed account of Scottish Jewry, and there's a few memoirs, including Ethel's, which is still here somewhere. Yeah. Her memoir, her Mackerel at Midnight, which is a great title for a memoir, and you can hear about it on Tuesday if you want to come along. So there's a few memoirs, but there's been very little fiction written. In fact, the only fiction that there's been written about the Scottish Jewish community was by Chaim Bermant. Is it Chaim Bermant? And in the 1960s, there was a couple of novels that he had that sort of vaguely set in Glasgow and so on. So there was no fiction anyway. And I mean, basically, I made a lot of it up. That's the truth of the matter. Like I said, there wasn't a lot of conflict, and so I had to make a lot of the stories up. I mean, I think it's quite true to the flavor of the time and so on, but I'm a writer, and I just, I didn't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Okay, so have you chosen a good bit to read to us?
Yeah, I'm just going to read a little bit because it's a funny kind of, setup here. Not sure if it's reading is that good a thing to be doing. But I'm going to read a little bit. I'm probably going to explain what I'm going to read is probably going to be longer than the reading. It's a very short piece I'm going to read, and it's very much at the end of the credit draper. And I wanted to read it because in a very short space of time, I introduce you to all the main characters and the themes at the same time. So it's at the end of the novel. Avram, I'm not giving anything away really to anybody who hasn't read it. Avram, who's the credit draper, the young credit draper, who's now in his 20s, comes back to Glasgow on the eve of Yom Kippur being the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, the fast day, and he's sitting down with the Khan family for the dinner before going to the synagogue to begin the Yom Kippur service, and so he's sitting there with the family. So you've got Papa Khan, who is his adopted father. You have Madam Khan, Madam Martha Khan. She's the mother, who was she's German. She's a German Jew, and she was sent off to an internment camp briefly when the First World War started, and a lot of the German Jews were rounded up and taken to a camp in Leeds because they were, they were the enemy, supposedly.
Yeah.
So that was a very traumatic experience for her. And then you have the daughter Celia, who becomes the heroine of my next novel, Celia Khan. She's a sort of feminist and socialist, his adopted sister. And then you have his adopted brother, Nathan. Nathan is quite a mysterious character in the book. Nathan is, there's a suspicion that he's a Lamed Vav. I don't know if people know what a Lamed Vav is. The Lamed Vav is there's a sort of myth in Jewish tradition that there are 36 righteous people living in the world at any given time that take on all the suffering of humankind on their shoulders. And if they didn't, the rest of us couldn't possibly bear the pain that there is in living in this world.
Yeah.
Which I don't know, it might be quite relevant in this day. It's so Nathan is this he's a young lad who's suffering constantly, and there's this idea that maybe he's one of the Lamed Vav, the 36 righteous men. I don't know if women, hopefully women as well. And there's actually a very interesting book, if you are interested in this, called The Last of the Just. It's a award-winning novel by Andrew Schwartz-Bart, a French novelist, who wrote about these 36 just men and women who take on the suffering of the world. But so this is the family, and they're about to set off for the synagogue, and they're very excited because the synagogue, which is in Glasgow, it's a very young congregation. It's the 1920s. The Jewish community is just growing a little bit. They're very excited because they've hired a chazan, a professional singer, to come up and conduct the service at the synagogue. So they're very excited about this. So I'm going to read a very short piece. So much was expected of the new chazan, least like some milk cow from a synagogue in London. A great milestone in the history of our synagogue, Papa Khan explained to Avram over dinner. Having our very own chazan represents the reaching of maturity for our Jewish community in the Gorbals. And not only a chazan, Madam Khan had continued, soon we will have a kosher restaurant in the city as well. And then you'll want your own kosher public house, Celia said. Papa Khan turned to her. You might reject our ways, young woman. You might think all our customs mean nothing, that we ramble on with our prayers in a language most of us do not understand. But what is important is that we sit down in the synagogue as a community. Papa, Nathan said, you're becoming too excited. Papa Khan brought his fist down on the table. His wife covered her face with her hands. Tell him to calm down, she will. Tell him to stop. No, I want Celia should understand this. It was the community that helped me when I arrived here. It was the community that helped your mother, the community that gave your uncle a job. Community, community, community. This Jewish community, it is not so different from this socialism. For once, Celia said nothing. But Madam Khan rose from the table, strode over to the piano. She lifted the lid and began to play a Scottish melody. Martha, please, her husband called her, come and sit down. Madam Khan continued banging out the notes with an unnecessary harshness. Martha, we are in the middle of dinner. Madam Khan stood up, walked calmly over to the open window. Only Scottish songs heard in this household, she shouted out into the street until Nathan pulled her back. No German music here, no Bach or Beethoven, only Scottish songs. So that's a little bit from the Credit Draper.
Fantastic, thank you. Just
weird kind of reading and not seeing. I need to go on to. Oh, okay, I can see people now. All right.
Yeah, if you see everybody, that's going to be good.
Reading to myself there.
If you Just for everybody, I've got some prepared questions, but there's time at the end for everyone's questions. So if anybody thinks of anything you'd like to ask David, just write it up in the chat. Or if you want to keep them secret, send them directly to me and I'll put them up there and I'll ask them later. So moving on nicely to the to the liberation of Celia Khan then. Where did the idea for that book come from?
Well, I was at had an event in London, a book festival there, and Ross Bradshaw. I know Ross isn't here, is he? I don't think so.
I haven't seen him.
Ross Bradshaw is a publisher. Was a publisher. I think he still publishes a little bit. With 5 Leaves in Nottingham, and he. I would just like to say about Ross Bradshaw that he gave up publishing or as a main occupation a few years ago and opened up a bookshop in Nottingham called 5 Leaves Bookshop against everybody's advice. That's it. What, you must be mad opening up a bookshop in this current publishing climate. The people were going online with their Kindles and so on. Anyway, he opened up this bookshop. It's kind of it's got quite a strong socialist bent to it, and it's voted the best independent bookshop in the United Kingdom, and the best bookshop in whatever area Nottingham is in, the Midlands or whatever, like 5 years running or something. So, good old Ross. But anyway, he was publishing at that time, and he came up to me at this event, and he said that he'd read The Credit Draper, and he wondered what happened to Celia. And I said, what? I said, what? What are you talking about? What happened to Celia? He says, well, I thought she was a very interesting character. I mean, what do you think happened to her? And I said, I have no idea. I'm not like J.K. Rowling has sort of filing cabinets full of her characters, biographies and so on. I said, no, I hadn't really thought about that. And he says, well, it's very interesting, the sort of what was going on for the Jews then, the Jewish communities in the UK at that time, because a lot of them had escaped from Russia because of the pogroms and so on, and many went to Palestine to start up kibbutzim, because they were, sort of very socialist minded and communist minded and so on. But they had to leave Russia, and they came to Scotland and the rest of the UK. And then suddenly there was the Russian Revolution in 1917, and they didn't know what to do. They thought, well, do we go back to Russia? This is fantastic. We've had this revolution, and some people did, and so on. So and it wasn't successful, so I guess the Jewish communities had a very sort of ambivalent relationship with Russia and socialism and so on. So Ross mentioned this to me, and immediately I thought about, again, going back to my own background, and I'm thinking, oh right, okay, Habonim, being brought up in with socialism and seeing Paul Robeson and going on May Day marches and all this kind of thing and singing the Internationale and whatever we did. So as soon as I had that conversation with them, I said, I'm going to go and write about this, and so that's what I did. Basically, I went to write about my next novel, The Liberation of Celia Khan, which is, you can see there, kind of goes in and out of my back, and yeah. So that was how the idea got started.
So tell us about the story of the actual novel then.
Well, a lot of it, the beginning of the novel overlaps with Avram's story in The Credit Draper, because they were adopted. Well, she was his adopted sister, and so they grew up together in Glasgow. And Avram goes off to be a credit draper, and she gets involved in all this sort of socialism movement that was going on in Glasgow at that time. There was socialist Sunday schools in Glasgow. There was a very famous woman called Agnes Calder, not sorry, not Agnes Calder, Mary Barber, who's just been recognised now in Glasgow. They just raised a statue to her in Govan. She was a Labour councillor and an activist and very much involved with the rent strikes that were going on in Glasgow during the war, and Red Clydeside, which was a hotbed of sort of Labour activity and unionist activity. And I mean, Glasgow was very close to revolution. I don't know if people, Glasgow people realize that. 1919, there was huge marches and demonstrations, and there was a real sense that that there were going to be riots, and the army sent in tanks to George Square and all this kind of thing. So so Celia gets involved in all of this. And there's also a strong kind of feminist movement in the 1920s and so on. And so I was looking for something for her to get involved in. She needed to have a cause. So I got her involved in the birth control movement in the 1920s. I mean, when it's 100 years ago, and it's hard to believe how ignorant people were at that time of contraception and any form of birth control. I mean, I think they were even ignorant of conception, never mind contraception. And she gets involved with this, and there's the sort of, you know, Mary Stopes is around at that time, and so she get, yeah, so Celia becomes a sort of activist for birth control, and in reality, the first birth control clinic outside of London was set up in Glasgow in 1927, I think it was. So that's really her storyline arc is really through all of these different events.
Okay, and then that takes us directly into The Land Agent, the third novel in the trilogy.
Yeah, so Celia eventually moves to, she gets disillusioned with her activities in Glasgow, as many people do with socialism, I guess. And she decides that she'd heard about the kibbutz movement in Israel, and as Palestine it was then, the 1920s, and decides that she wants to go and live in one of these communal settlements that are springing up throughout Palestine. And so off she goes, and so the novel moves to Palestine, and I wanted to I don't know, I guess I wanted to show the issues about Palestine in the 1920s that were different from what we think of today. I mean, today it's sort of, you know, it's very much a sort of Zionist, Palestinian, these sort of are the main sort of protagonists. Yeah. But back in the 1920s, there was a lot of different factors that were going on about land in Palestine. There was the kibbutz movement. There was Arab nationalism coming from, you know, the countries that became Syria and Lebanon and Jordan and so on. There was the French were there, the British were there. There was a land organization, a purchasing land organization that was buying up land in Palestine. There was all kinds of different interests, and so the story of The Land Agent is about another character called Lev, a Polish Jew who. And so he comes into Palestine from a Polish angle, and he works for one of the land agencies there, and he discovers a piece of land that doesn't exist on any map on the border with Jordan, on one of the tributaries of the Jordan and the Yarmouk River. And then so this results in this I mean, it's a very strategic piece of land, and it results in this kind of battle for ownership between the French and the British and the Bedouin and the land agency and a Russian engineer that wants to build the dam there. And so I was trying to show that there was a different side to the land issues of Palestine back in the 1920s, and so I kind of wanted to show that through my characters.
And how much research did you have to do for that one? Was that related to where you lived when you were in Israel?
Yeah, the land that I'm talking about was where my kibbutz was built. My kibbutz was founded in 1924 on land that was purchased for it by by a Jewish agency. I think I'm not sure what who it was purchased from. It might have been from the Bedouins, because the Bedouins were given lots of land by the British up in that area. To be honest, when I started off writing about Palestine, I thought this is going to be a nightmare. I'm going to have to be really know my research here. I'm going to have to, because I'm going to get hammered from from whatever side. I'm going to get, the Jews, the Palestinians, everybody's going to be on top of me if I don't get it right. So I was very worried. I was all prepared to sort of spend years of research. So a strange thing happened, and that was on my kibbutz, which is kind of, like I said, was the sort of the situation for the novel. There was a train station, an abandoned train station. When I say a station, I mean there was a sort of some concrete platform and maybe a little sort of station house or something on the platform, and there were some sort of twisted rails sort of cast around the fields and so on. And I never paid this station any attention. I must have passed it, going out to the fields 2 or 3 times a week, and there would be this abandoned sort of rails covered in weeds and all this kind of. I never thought anything about it. Anyway, this station was called Al Dalhamia was the name of the station, and it was a station on the way between Damascus and Mecca. It was basically the way that pilgrims would travel for the Hajj, and it went through the West Bank now. It went down to Bet Shan, and then it also had a spur that went to Haifa. So it was basically Damascus to Mecca, and then with a spur to Haifa. And so it was the Palestinian Railways, and it was a major railway, and there was this station on the kibbutz. And this is what I discovered when I was doing research. So and I thought to myself, well, why was it called? Why was there a station there? It was in the middle of fields and stuff. Why did they have a station? And why was it called Al Dalhamia? And so I started to do my research, and there's a website that for the Palestinians, it's called Palestine Remembered, and this website contains the names of all the villages and towns and that were destroyed or were evacuated or whatever the reasons. In 1948, 1949, during War of Independence, or the Nakba, what the Palestinians call it. And in this list of villages was Al Dalhamia, and it was very detailed. It said there was 90 families lived there. It was destroyed in 1948 when the Jewish Brigade came up along the border with Jordan, blew up the bridges there, and this village was destroyed, and the population moved to Lebanon, I think. So I thought, oh, well, I didn't know anything about this. And then, so I wrote to the kibbutz. A friend of mine runs the archive center in the kibbutz, and I said, I don't remember seeing a village called, I plowed those fields. I plowed those fields. I never saw a wall, bricks, or any sign of there being any village there. And he wrote back and he says, there are people alive today on the kibbutz. He says that there was no village there, right? So I thought, well, I don't know what the truth is. I don't know what the truth is. You know, I mean, I've got on one side, I've got photographs of, you know, from Palestinians and documentation and details of family. And on the other side, I've got said, no, never been a village there. Don't know what you're talking about. And for myself, I never saw one piece of evidence that was village there. So I realized I don't know what the truth is. So I can just make this up because it doesn't matter. I can just, you know, I don't have to worry about anything anymore because everybody's got their own story. Everybody's got their own story, and I can just have my own story too. So yeah. So instead of being worried about a whole lot of research, I just I went on, and I'm not saying I made things up, but and if you do read the Land Agent, it tells you at the back which things are true and, well, I don't know, true is the right word, but which things are historical facts and which aren't. But it was quite a liberating process, and it also, I mean, you learn so much about, you know, what is truth, you know, well, it's just narrative. Our truths are just the stories that we make up for ourselves, and that's so yeah. So to answer your question, I thought I was going to do a lot of research, but in the end of the day, I didn't have to do that much because I didn't have to worry about the facts too much because everybody has their own version.
Yeah, I think that's always the story when you're talking about land. There would always be two different different versions.
Yeah, no, what or conflict, just
Yeah.
conflict. You know, I mean, whatever the conflict is. I mean, even with the conflict, the situation that we're in now, you know, is this a man-made virus, or was it a natural occurring thing? Whose narrative is going to win?
Yeah.
You know, I think that's what it's all about.
Oof. Let's take us back to take us back to the 20th century. I can't think about this one for the moment. I was just looking at the lovely thing behind you. Were you going to change your background to be more in keeping with?
I was actually just thought about that. I think I can do the Land Agent, I think. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. There we go. There's a Land Agent. There's the cover of the Land Agent.
Okay, and what have you what reading have you chosen?
Yeah, I'm going to do a very short reading, you'll be pleased to know. It's at the very end of the book, and I just wanted to. I'm actually going to tell you more of a story after I've read this, but so basically, this is the end of the trilogy. It doesn't really give that much. I'm not really giving anything away here, but basically, it's Celia is reflecting on her experience in Palestine, and she's back in Scotland. And it's just again, it sort of brings the whole thing that I talked about at the beginning about the themes about community and identity and so on, and it just brings it all back in a nice kind of tidy way. So this is Celia talking. She says, "As for me, I feel that I started to recover as soon as I set foot in the Highlands. I cannot fully describe what it feels like to walk on a land that is free. The people of Scotland surely do not appreciate how lucky they are to have access to this space, this wildness, this beauty without worry or dispute. Who owns that loch down there? And those mountains and that gorse and that stream, that wild hare? I do not know. I do not care. Possibly some laird somewhere in his fancy house, but he's not chasing me off his land unless I come armed with traps and a shotgun for the purpose of poaching. I want to go outside it gives me so much happiness to feel this liberated. I want to go outside and dance barefoot on the heather to try and embrace this landscape in the gather of my arms. But I know I cannot grasp such beauty, for it is not there for the ownership, but for the enjoyment and appreciation. Palestine is such a different land to this one. It is a place so parched in places that every little patch of greenery represents a triumph of nature over adversity. Land and water, water and land, what a struggle we had to procure both. Yet here I can step out of the cottage door and drink cool, clear water from a mountain stream to my heart's content. I can bathe myself in it, launder all the clothes of the Shire in it without a thought for its source or its availability. what I miss about the Holy Land is the light. There was such an intensity in that light I cannot describe. When I was bathed in it, I felt as if I were being kissed by God. I just want to add a sort of coda to that from my own experience. I did an event up in Ullapool a few years ago, and the nice thing about the Ullapool Book Festival is that the writers get to stay there for 3 days, 2 or 3 days, and so you can get to meet other writers. And during that time I was there, sorry, I'm just gonna. One of the other authors that were doing this event was a Palestinian writer and lawyer called Raja Shahade. I don't know if you may or may not have heard of him. He was born in Ramallah, and his father was also a lawyer and was part of the Oslo Accords. He helped negotiate that and so on. Anyway, he's a lovely man, Raja, and he's written many books. I went to one of his books called Palestinian Walks when I was doing research for the Land Agent, the little research I was doing, because I was looking for to get a flavor of the land from a Palestinian point of view. Yeah. And so he's written this lovely book. It's called Palestinian Walks. It's quite a well-known book. And it's basically about him growing up and living in Ramallah, and how his walks have changed through the years through the occupation and so on, and how they've become restricted and limited, and things that he could do as a child he couldn't do. And remarkably, I mean, he's not. I would have thought he would be a very angry and bitter person, but he was just very kind, very generous, just wanting peace and so on. Anyway, one day during this festival, I said to him, Raj, I says, come on, let's go for a walk. Let's go for a walk. So so off we went into the Highlands, and we're walking along, and I suddenly just was overcome by this emotion of walking with them and thinking about his experience, like I've just said in the Land Agent. You know, his different experience of being able to go out and walk in the land in Israel or Palestine, and here we are in Scotland, that we can just, without a thought, we can just set off and walk together. And so it was a very emotional kind of experience for me, that having this freedom. And then, of course, the irony is here we are now, and we can't go out of our houses. So I don't know, we've kind of come full circle in some ways, but in a funny kind of way. Anyway, so that was kind of an interesting experience that came from writing the book and meeting Raja and so on. Fantastic. So yeah,
we've got a couple of questions about this trilogy, and then I'm going to briefly look at your other 2 novels before we draw it to a close. So
do people want to do questions, or?
Yeah, I'm just going to take these 2 questions. I'm just going to take these 2 questions that we've had about the trilogy, and then we've got a question about your other 2 novels as well. So, so first, name your kibbutz. Would you? They want to know.
The kibbutz was Ashdod Yaakov Ichud. Ashdod Yaakov is Ashdod means waterfall, and Yaakov is Jacob. It's Jacob's waterfall, and Baron Jacob Rothschild was the donor, the anonymous donor, who provided the money to buy the land for the kibbutz. So it was called Jacob's Waterfall, which was Ashdod Yaakov. And Ichud, at that time when we lived there, was one of the movements, the kibbutz movements. It was there was various kibbutz movements. Our kibbutz split into 2 in the 1950s. One became more left-wing than the other. The Ichud kibbutz was kind of center-left, and the other kibbutz that it split from was Me'ochad, which is much further left. And I don't think that's significant now, but at the time it was politically quite significant. So it was Ashdod Yaakov, and Ichud was the kibbutz movement it belonged to.
Right. And then one person says, I apologise, I haven't yet read The Land Agent. So what story did you devise for the history of the station? Which story did you choose?
That's a good, well, it didn't matter because the conflict, what story, did I have a village Al-Dalhamia? No, the conflict, I suppose what happened in 1948, I suppose, is when the issues really occurred. No, at the time in my novel, there is a railway station. Yes, there is a railway station, and there's a Bedouin village there. There's a Bedouin village. I've got the Bedouins living there. So I kind of glossed over the conflict and went somewhere else, which made it easier.
Okay. So moving on then, Philip, would you like to ask your question about the other books? I've just unmuted you.
Hi, David. How are you doing?
Fine, Philip. Nice to see you.
I have read all your books, and it just strikes me that your other two books are so very different. One's got the Japan theme, and I know you've lived in Japan for a while, and it unites Japan and Glasgow, but it's very different. And then your latest book is about a film star, which just seems totally off the wall compared to these things. I'm just wondering where the ideas for these came from.
Right. Can you hear me? Am I back on?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think with the trilogy, I wrote out my Jewish stuff. That was other people go to therapy. Writers we just write it all out. So I got rid of, so that's the Jewish stuff gone. And then I lived, as you say, I lived in Japan for 7 years, and I love Japan very much. I love living there. And for those of you who don't know, I wrote my Japanese novel. It's called An Exquisite Sense of What is Beautiful. And I got the idea for the Japanese book again because I really wanted to write about a sort of a different kind of novel that sort of trying to show a different part of Japan that maybe not so much now, but back then I think everybody thought Japan was Tokyo and that was about it. But when I first arrived in Japan, I was teaching at an American school, and this Canadian woman, whose name I can never remember, but I'm very grateful to her if ever I meet her again in my life. She said to me, and this was pretty much my first week in living in Japan, and she said to me, there are 3 things that you need to know about Japan, right? And I said, yeah, well, what are they? And she says, well, if you break into a 10,000 yen note, 10,000 yen is about 40 pounds, like a 40-pound note. She says, if you break into that, you can kiss it goodbye, right? As soon as you've changed it into anything, that money will go in a second. So that was the first thing she told me. The second thing she told me was, if you start bowing when you're talking on the telephone, it's time for you to leave. So if you start going, hi, so that's no, hi, so that's no, she says, it's time for you to leave. And then she said, the third thing that you have to know is that the Japanese, and this is because our husband, our ex-husband, was an architect. And she says, the Japanese have an exquisite sense of what is beautiful and no sense of what is ugly. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to say. And she was referring to the buildings in Japan. I mean, because for anybody that's been there, I mean, you can see the most phenomenally beautiful temples and not just buildings, but art. And I'm sure you all know it, whether it's pottery or whether it's, all kinds of design and so on. But at the same time, you can see the most horrible buildings you could possibly imagine, with green dragons draped around them and God knows what. So that's what she told me. So I thought that was a great title for a novel. So my Japanese novel is called An Exquisite Sense of What is Beautiful, with a subtext and no sense of what is ugly. And my publishers said, we're never going to get this, not my publisher, when I was sending it out, who said, you're never going to get this published because it's too long a title and it's not going to fit on the spine of the book. And this was you know, when was this, about 7 or 8 years ago. Nowadays, long titles have become very popular, but at the time it wasn't, and they kept asking me to change it, but I've kept it, and I'm very pleased with it. So yeah, so it's An Exquisite Sense of Beautiful is my Japanese novel, and it's about denial. The theme of the novel, the deep theme is about denial, which in some ways kind of reflects the title. There's, you know, we've got this exquisite sense of what's beautiful, but we're denying what is ugly. And it's about a British writer at the end of his career. He goes back to Japan, where he wrote this famous novel called The Water Wheel, which was it was kind of humanizing the Japanese in the eyes of the world after the Second World War. And it was accusing the Americans of being in denial about the dropping of the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is true to this day. Because they've never reflected on that, in the way that maybe Germany has reflected on what happened, you know, during the war. America's never reflected for one moment about killing 200,000 people in the space of 2 days in August 1944, and it's something. I mean, it's unimaginable. I mean, today, I mean, if you thought that somebody just bombed the city and killed 90,000 people just like that, I think we would think that would be unimaginable today. And yet in 1945, August 1945, this is what happened, and there's been no reflection on it. So this novel is about denial. It's about this writer sort of writing about the American denial, but at the same time, in his own life, he's also in denial about what went on in his personal life. He was involved with a Japanese chambermaid and also an famous American artist. And so it's America and Japan and a British writer in the middle of it all, and it's about personal denial, and it's about political denial. And so yeah, that's Exquisite Sense of What is Beautiful. And you asked me, I don't know, have we got time to go on here?
Yeah.
So the other novel Phil was mentioning was A Woman of Integrity, which is about, as you said, about a film star in, again, 1900. She was born in 1900, so I can keep track of her age. And 2 film stars, one in the present era and one in the past. And the woman in the present has the opportunity to star in a play, I think it was, I remember now, about the woman in the past, to play her life in the past. And this is a woman she admired very much for her integrity. She was delighted to be given this role, to play this woman she admired very much for her integrity. But as she just gets more and more investigating into this woman's life, this previous actress' life, she discovers that maybe she didn't have as much integrity as she thought she had. So it's about two women in 2 different times trying to find their way in the world. And it's actually based on Martha Gellhorn. Did you know who people know who Martha Gellhorn was? Martha Gellhorn was married to Ernest Hemingway. No? I'm looking at some faces here, but I don't see any.
Yes, some people are saying yes, definitely.
Yeah. One of my friends, she's an actress, and she was telling me the story how she was asked to play to do a one-woman play about Martha Gellhorn. Martha Gellhorn was married to Ernest Hemingway, and a phenomenal journalist in her own right and writer, and was completely overshadowed by the fact that she was married to Hemingway. and but she was a war correspondent, and she was the one that got Hemingway involved in Paris and all this, and the D-Day landings and everything. Anyway, this friend of mine, she was asked to play Martha Gellhorn in a play, and they decided to do some research about her, and they went to her son, her adopted son, who lives in Devon or Dorset, somewhere in the south of England, and is alive today. So I'm always a wee bit worried about telling this story. But so they went to the son because he holds the archives to Martha Gellhorn's estate. And they went to the son and they said, could we have access to see her letters and material and so on, because we want to do this play about her, this one-woman play. And this man, Sandy Gellhorn, said to them, I'll let you have access to the material, but I want you to put on a play of mine first. Mm-hmm. I'll give you access to the material, but I want you to produce my play first. So first of all, this was a ridiculous thing for a trustee of a literary estate to say. So my friend, Sian, her name is, so she was confronted with this dilemma. She says, here I am wanting to be in this play, portray the woman that I've always admired for integrity, Martha Gellhorn, and now my own integrity is being challenged, by this man asking me to put on a play. I mean, this is ridiculous. And so that's where the story for the novel comes from. And you'll have to read the book to find out what she does.
Fantastic. And you'll never tell us who the man was.
Sorry?
And we won't know who the man was. Right, I have another question from Karen.
Yep.
Where's Karen? So unmute Karen and off you go.
Ooh. Hi, it's a bit dark here, sorry. I just wondered, David, I've loved all your books. Are you writing another one?
Well, I've written another one. It's called The Responsibility of Love. And it's with my publisher. And I'm trying to persuade, she doesn't like it. Or she hasn't liked the first version that she saw, and she's now looking at a revised version. So I'm waiting to find out. I've been waiting for quite a long time to find out whether she's going to publish it or not. And yeah, so it's again very different from anything else I've written, about whether we're forever responsible for those we have tamed, which comes from The Little Prince. Whether if you've allowed someone to fall in love with you, are you forever responsible for them? So that's the theme of my next book. So, but whether it will see the light of day, I don't know, and it's hard to know what's going on in the publishing world right now. I don't know whether it's a good time for them or not. I don't know whether, despite the fact that people can't get out to bookshops and stuff, I'm not sure how the online trade is going, but so we'll see. But thank you for asking, and I'm waiting is the answer.
So here's a nice question from Ehud, so I shall unmute you for that. And it's a good question because I think it answers what you were just talking about, where's the publishing trade going? And I think this might be, I think we'll have a couple more questions and then we'll finish. So Ehud, I've unmuted you.
Yeah, I was just wondering which book was most successful? I mean, which book did people buy and read the most?
The Exquisite Sense of What is Beautiful. That's been my most successful book by far. I think the reason, Ehud, is because it's got a lovely cover. I don't know can you see the cover? I love the cover.
In front of you, I think. Yeah, that's the only way.
It's a lovely cover with carp, and it had a really interesting title, and that's basically that's all you need. I almost felt that the next book I should just try and have an interesting cover and a nice title and just have blank pages. because I think that's basically why people buy books, why they pick them up. So yeah, it was my most successful book. I mean, it's probably because it took me such a long time to get it published, and I ended up writing it and writing and rewriting. So I've actually, it's very. I think it's my best written book as well, and the one I'm most proud of. But and it was also a Kindle Daily deal, and it's amazing how many books you sell when you're a Kindle Daily deal.
Also, it was the most crowded book launch that I've ever been to.
Yes. Oh, yes, that's right. That was the largest book launch that Watterson's held in Sauchiehall Street that year, apart from Alex Ferguson's autobiography.
Wow. Well,
There you go.
congratulations.
Just me and Alex had to move his to somewhere else. It was so big, but yeah, it was very. Thank you. There's people there who came in the audience tonight, but yeah, thank you for that.
So I think we could go on to gallery view and give David a big round of applause, but like a quiet round of applause. And I will unmute you all and let you have a very badly designed unmuted round of applause for everybody. And thank you.
And
Just like to thank David so much for his contribution tonight. I'm going to mute you again so that I can. David. So thank you so much, David. That was absolutely fascinating, brilliant, really nice to scoot through the Scottish Jewish history books and onto your new world. There's another part of the story which is you've been travelling for the last while, and there might be some travel books in there. I think maybe an hour and a bit more is just a bit much, but if there's anything that you'd like to finish off with in terms of your travel stories before we finish.
So not really. I mean, I've been traveling I've been homeless for the last 3 years, basically. And just traveling around. I've just, as I said, as Christopher and I think Nina's there also. I've spent 5 months in Spain. People always ask me, says, "Oh, well, this is you must get lots of material from traveling." And no, I don't. I have to say, when I'm traveling, I'm really not thinking about writing, or so I don't. And I don't want to be a travel writer either. I just think they're a great travel writer. If I ever try to write about my travels, it just comes out as really kind of gushing mush. And so I'm never going to make a travel writer. But I think occasionally down the line, I guess I'm picking at little things when I'm traveling, and later on they might form parts of a book here and there. But no, they're not. I'm not traveling to write. To that way, my mind's usually on other things when I'm traveling. Like, when is my publisher going to tell me about whether she's going to take my book or not? But yeah. Well,
this has been the most brilliant second in our series of 3 talks. They've totally gone over the amount of people that we thought we'd have, of financial contribution towards the Aberdeen Synagogue that we thought we'd have. Obviously, the quality was exactly what I thought we'd have. It's been fantastic to have you here. Thank you so much, David.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Am I speaking? Can I?
You are speaking, yes.
Yeah, just to thank everybody for people that I know and people that I don't know and people that have read my books, and yeah, just thank you very much for coming along this evening and contributing and so on. So yeah, very much appreciate it. It's been very nice